She never expected to be noticed. Most people overlooked her, dismissing her as just another face in the crowd, a quiet woman with no voice, no power, and certainly no importance. But the moment her parrot spoke, everything changed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, in a dusty little store, just after the sun dipped behind the buildings. There she was, picking up groceries, humming to herself, when he appeared. The man who'd mocked her for years, his cruel words always cutting deep, always making her feel smaller than she was. Today, he stood in front of her, eyes glinting with that same arrogance, as if he had the right to judge her life. His voice was sharp, full of venom, but as he opened his mouth to belittle her once again, something incredible happened. "His stash is hidden behind the old oak tree," the parrot squawked from her shoulder. The man froze. The words hit him like a slap. She wasn't sure what made him stop, but she saw the change in his face, a shift, a flicker of doubt. He glanced at the parrot, and then back to her, unsure if he'd heard right. But she had. And in that moment she knew, she was not who he thought she was. What did the parrot just reveal? And why did it feel like this was only the beginning? Her name was Clara, though most people called her the quiet woman or the one with the parrot. But that wasn't who she truly was. She had grown up in a world where being unseen was a daily struggle. Her childhood was marked by silence and solitude, where every whisper of hope felt distant and every step she took was heavy with expectation. The scars of abandonment ran deep, leaving her with a quiet sadness that few noticed, at least until the parrot came into her life. It was a cold winter's day when the bird found her. She was walking home from the market, the wind biting at her cheeks, when she heard a soft rustling in the alley. At first, she thought it was just another stray animal, but when she looked down, she saw him, a young, scruffy parrot, shaking with cold. His feathers were dull, and his eyes were full of fear, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her stop. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, though she didn't expect an answer. But he blinked, tilted his head, and then, unbelievably, he spoke. "Don't let them see you." Clara didn't know why, but she felt an instant connection. From that moment, the parrot, whom she named Jasper, became her closest companion. He stayed with her through the loneliness, offering words of comfort when no one else could. At first, his words were simple, small phrases that didn't make much sense, but over time, they grew clearer, more purposeful. They were an unlikely pair. Clara, a quiet woman whose past was filled with broken dreams, and Jasper, a parrot with the wisdom of an old soul. He became her voice when she had none, and her strength when she was weak. Together, they faced the world, though it often seemed like the world didn't see them at all. Then there was Edward. He was a local shopkeeper, a man with more power than he knew how to use. His demeanor was cold, and his presence felt like a weight on the small town. Clara had never really crossed his path until that day at the market. But he had always made her feel small, his mocking laughter echoing in her mind even when he wasn't around. She didn't know it then, but Edward's cruelty was just a reflection of the world's harshness toward her, a world that had long underestimated her. Yet with Jasper by her side, she felt a sense of hope she hadn't known since childhood. Perhaps she wasn't as invisible as they thought. And maybe, just maybe, this parrot, this small, strange creature, was the key to unlocking the truth of who she really was. Little did Clara know that everything was about to change. Jasper wasn't just a companion, he was a messenger, and his words held more power than she could imagine. The truth was coming, and with it, her life would never be the same. The town Clara called home was a place of quiet routines, where the sun always seemed to rise and set with little notice from its residents. Nestled between two rolling hills, it was a town that felt like it belonged to another time, stuck in the middle of nowhere, yet bustling in its own understated way. The streets were lined with small, family-owned businesses, and the same faces passed by every day. Clara's small apartment sat on the edge of town, tucked between a bakery that always smelled of fresh bread and a tiny flower shop that closed by sunset. Her neighbors often greeted her with a quick smile, but they never lingered, always hurrying off to the next task. To them, Clara was simply the quiet woman with the parrot, a figure who seemed to blend into the background, unnoticed and unimportant. But in the stillness of her home, with only Jasper perched on her shoulder or by her side, Clara was more than just the quiet woman. Here, she was herself, though even she didn't fully understand who that was. The town, despite its charm, had an underlying tension. There was a clear divide between those who had money and those who didn't. The rich lived on the outskirts, in large, imposing homes that looked down on the town with silent judgment. They were the ones who made the rules, the ones who walked with an air of superiority. Then there were the rest, the workers, the shopkeepers, the people who made the town run, but never seemed to reap the benefits of their labor. Clara fit into the latter group, a quiet soul who blended in with the crowd, never drawing attention to herself. But it wasn't just the social divide that Clara felt. There was something more subtle, more insidious about the way she was treated. Every day, she passed through the heart of the town, where the rich and powerful gathered at their favorite cafes, chatting about business deals and future plans, while Clara hurried past, careful not to make eye contact. She had learned long ago that those who lived in the shadows of the town's wealth were invisible, ignored, dismissed, as if their lives didn't matter. And then there was Edward. Clara knew him well, though he likely never paid much attention to her. Edward owned the town's largest shop, a place that sold everything from expensive goods to rare trinkets that only the wealthy could afford. He was a man who thrived on control and power, and he wielded it without hesitation. His eyes always seemed to pierce through her, as if he could see right into her soul. Clara never understood why, but there was something about his presence that made her skin crawl. Edward had a reputation for belittling those beneath him. He treated the workers like pawns in his game, his words sharp and cutting, leaving a trail of bruised egos in his wake. Clara had witnessed it many times, watching as he mocked others for their misfortunes, their failures. And yet, when he looked at her, he never spoke. He never mocked her outright, but there was a coldness in his eyes that made her feel just as invisible as everyone else in town. It was as though he found her beneath notice, unworthy of his time or words. But it wasn't just Edward who made Clara feel small. It was the town itself, the way it seemed to look down on those who weren't wealthy, the way it turned a blind eye to the struggles of people like her. The rich, the powerful, they held all the cards, and the rest of them had no choice but to accept their place. But Clara wasn't one to fight back. She had learned to remain silent, to shrink into herself, to accept the quiet cruelty of the world without protest. She didn't have the strength to argue, and she certainly didn't have the power to change anything. She had her small life, her little routine, and her parrot. And that was enough. Or so she thought. But Jasper, her little parrot, had a different idea. He had always been more than just a companion. Over the years, Clara had grown used to his sudden bursts of speech, his offhand remarks, his moments of uncanny wisdom. He was more than just a pet. He was a confidant, a protector, a reminder that she wasn't completely alone in the world. And then one day, during one of their regular visits to the town square, something shifted. Edward, as usual, stood near his shop, exchanging cold words with a local merchant. His laughter rang through the air, dismissive and cruel. Clara had seen it all before, the way he made people feel small with just a few words. But today, Jasper had had enough. As Clara walked past, trying to avoid Edward's gaze, the parrot squawked loudly, "He hides it behind the oak tree." It wasn't just a phrase. It was a statement of truth. Clara had never heard Jasper speak with such clarity, such certainty. And for a moment, as the words hung in the air, she saw the shift in Edward's face, a brief flicker of surprise, followed by a hasty glance at her. He had heard it too. But what did it mean? Why had Jasper said it? What secret was Jasper revealing? For the first time in Clara's life, she felt a rush of power, not from her own actions, but from the words of the small creature perched on her shoulder. The world around her seemed to shift, as if the veil that had kept her invisible was beginning to tear away. The secret of the oak tree, whatever it was, held the key to something bigger, something that would change everything. And Jasper, her quiet parrot, was the one to unlock it. The next day, the tension hung in the air like a thick fog, oppressive and unyielding. Clara woke early, unable to shake the strange feeling from the day before. Jasper, as usual, sat by the window, his bright eyes scanning the outside world. His feathers glinted in the morning light, but there was something different about him today. He seemed more alert, more present than ever before, as if he, too, felt the weight of the secret he had revealed. Clara's heart raced as she replayed the moment in the town square. "He hides it behind the oak tree." The words echoed in her mind. What had Jasper meant? Why had he said that? It felt like a warning, a clue to something hidden, something dangerous. But as Clara walked through the streets that morning, trying to focus on the mundane tasks ahead, she couldn't shake the memory of Edward's reaction. She had seen the flicker of surprise in his eyes when Jasper spoke. He hadn't mocked her or dismissed her, as he always did. No, this time, he had been shaken, rattled. It was as if he knew exactly what Jasper had meant, as if the parrot's words had uncovered something he wanted to keep buried. The weight of the unspoken hung between them, heavy and palpable. And Clara, who had always been silent in the face of injustice, found herself struggling to stay quiet. She had never confronted Edward, never dared to stand up to him, but today felt different. Today, there was a quiet strength in her, one that had been building slowly, nurtured by Jasper's unexpected words. She passed by the bakery, where the smell of fresh bread filled the air. The town seemed like it was moving as it always had, slow, steady, predictable, but Clara's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that something big was happening. And for the first time in her life, she felt a sense of urgency. The world around her, once so familiar and comfortable, now felt like a puzzle, pieces falling into place, waiting to be understood. At the corner of the square, she saw Edward again. He was standing near his shop, talking to a customer, but his gaze flicked over to her, sharp and calculating. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Clara felt the weight of his scrutiny. It was as if he was measuring her, waiting for her to make a move. She could feel the heat of his stare, but she didn't flinch. For the first time, she stood her ground, holding his gaze without shrinking away. Jasper squawked loudly, his voice cutting through the silence. He knows. He knows what's hidden. Clara's heart skipped a beat. This time, the parrot's words weren't just a casual remark. They were a confirmation, a challenge. Edward did know. And he didn't want anyone to find out what he was hiding. Her pulse quickened as the pieces began to fit together. The oak tree. The secret. It all pointed to something bigger than she had imagined, something that Edward had kept hidden for far too long. But what was so important about that tree? And what was he hiding that he'd go to such lengths to keep it buried? Before she could dwell on it any longer, Edward approached her, his presence looming over her like a shadow. His voice was cold, like always, but there was a sharpness to it today, a hint of unease that Clara had never noticed before. "You've been quiet, Clara," he said, his tone mocking. "That parrot of yours says some odd things, doesn't he?" Clara's stomach churned, but she refused to look away. "He speaks the truth," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the anxiety bubbling inside her. Edward smirked, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in closer. "You think you know something, don't you? You and your little bird." He laughed softly, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. "You don't know anything, Clara. Stay out of things that don't concern you." Clara didn't answer. She simply stood there, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew he was hiding something. She knew Jasper had spoken the truth, and she wasn't about to let Edward intimidate her anymore. The power that had been slowly building inside her, the quiet strength, the knowledge that she wasn't alone, was growing stronger with every passing moment. And though she didn't fully understand it yet, Clara knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let Edward get away with whatever he was hiding. As Edward turned away, Clara felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: defiance. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. And with Jasper by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. But just as she was about to turn and walk away, Jasper spoke again, his voice soft but clear. "The oak tree. Go there. You'll find what you need." Clara's heart raced. The oak tree. She had to go. She had to see for herself what was hidden, what Edward had been so desperate to keep buried. And for the first time, Clara didn't hesitate. She knew what she had to do. Clara walked quickly, her breath steady but her heart racing. Jasper, perched on her shoulder, was unusually quiet, his small, sharp eyes darting around as if he, too, felt the weight of what was coming. The town square was still bustling, but Clara felt as though the world around her had slowed, the noise becoming muffled, as if everything was happening in the background of a dream. She couldn't stop thinking about what had just transpired. Edward's mocking tone, his threatening words, the way he had tried to intimidate her. But this time, Clara didn't shrink away. This time, she stood her ground. And as she moved toward the edge of town, she felt a stirring within her, something that had been dormant for so long, something that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be awakened. The oak tree was just ahead. She had passed it countless times, but never with this sense of urgency. It stood at the edge of a small patch of forest, its thick branches stretching high into the sky, its bark weathered and gnarled. To most, it was just another tree, unremarkable and easily overlooked. But to Clara, it was now the key to something far bigger than she could have imagined. Jasper's feathers fluffed up, and he let out a small, urgent squawk. "It's here," he said, his voice low but firm. "Look closely." Clara slowed her pace as she reached the base of the tree. Her eyes scanned the ground, the familiar sight of the roots and fallen leaves now looking unfamiliar, as though they were hiding something she couldn't yet see. She knelt down, her fingers brushing over the rough bark, trying to steady her breath. There had to be something here, something that would explain Edward's strange reaction, something that would shed light on what he was hiding. And then she found it. A small, weathered box, partially buried beneath the roots, its corners peeking out from the dirt. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had found it, the secret. She reached for the box, her hands trembling as she pulled it from the earth. It was surprisingly heavy, the wood worn smooth from years of exposure to the elements. As she opened it, her heart pounded in her chest, and she couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. What could be inside? Inside the box, there were stacks of old documents, brittle and yellowed with age. But beneath them was something else, something that caught the light in a way that made Clara's breath catch. It was a small, intricately carved stone, its surface covered in markings she didn't recognize. The stone seemed to hum with energy, as if it held some secret power, something that had been hidden away for years. Jasper tilted his head, his sharp eyes studying the stone. "That's it," he said softly. "That's what he's been hiding." Clara's fingers trembled as she carefully lifted the stone from the box, its weight grounding her in the moment. She didn't know what it was, but she knew one thing for certain: it was important. It held the key to everything, and it was no accident that it had been hidden away, buried beneath the oak tree. The stone had been waiting for her, waiting for the right moment, just as she had been waiting for the strength to uncover the truth. As Clara stood up, holding the stone in her hands, she felt a surge of power, something that had been building inside her, growing stronger with every passing moment. She wasn't just the quiet woman with the parrot anymore. She was someone who had uncovered a secret, someone who held the power to change everything. And yet, even as the adrenaline coursed through her veins, there was a lingering doubt. What did this all mean? What was the connection between this stone, Edward, and the mysterious stash he had been hiding? The answers were just out of reach, but Clara knew one thing for sure: she couldn't go back. She couldn't pretend she hadn't seen this. She couldn't ignore the truth that had been revealed to her. Jasper's voice was soft but firm. "You found it. Now it's time to face him." Clara nodded, her gaze focused on the small stone in her hand. She wasn't sure what she would find when she confronted Edward, but she knew she couldn't run from this any longer. The secret was out. The power was in her hands. As she turned to leave the oak tree, Jasper squawked again, this time with a hint of excitement in his voice. "The game has changed, Clara. You're no longer invisible." And with those words, Clara felt it, a shift. A subtle but unmistakable shift. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked woman. She was someone with a purpose, someone who had discovered the truth and was ready to take control of her fate. The journey was just beginning, and Clara knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something big was about to happen, but the weight of the stone in her pocket gave her a strange sense of resolve. She had the secret now. The mysterious stone and the hidden documents were proof of something more than Edward's arrogance, more than the town's indifference to her. She had uncovered a hidden world, one that had remained unseen for far too long. And with Jasper at her side, she was no longer going to remain in the shadows. The days after the discovery were a blur. Clara couldn't stop thinking about the stone and the strange markings etched into it. She had tried to decipher them, but they were unlike anything she had ever seen before. Even Jasper seemed unusually quiet, as if he too was trying to understand the significance of what they had uncovered. The parrot, once chatty and eager to share his thoughts, was now more reserved, watching Clara with a knowing gaze as though he, too, felt the weight of what they had found. On a chilly afternoon, as Clara sat at the small kitchen table, trying to make sense of the documents in the box, she heard a soft knock on the door. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't often that someone visited her, especially uninvited. Her pulse quickened as she moved toward the door, her thoughts racing. Could it be Edward? Had he figured out she was the one who had discovered the hidden stash? When she opened the door, she was met with the last person she expected, Maggie, the local librarian. Maggie was a quiet woman who kept to herself, just like Clara, but they'd exchanged pleasantries over the years whenever their paths crossed. Clara had always found her approachable, though Maggie had never seemed particularly invested in the goings-on of the town. But today, there was a sense of urgency in her eyes, a spark of curiosity. "Clara," Maggie said, her voice low and steady. "I need to talk to you." Clara hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to let Maggie in. As soon as the librarian entered, her gaze flicked toward the table, where Clara had laid out the old papers and the stone. Clara quickly moved to cover them with a cloth, but Maggie had already seen. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small, faded photograph. She placed it on the table between them. Clara leaned in, her breath catching in her throat. The photograph showed a much younger Maggie, standing next to a man Clara didn't recognize. The man was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to pierce right through the lens. He looked familiar, though Clara couldn't place him. "This man," Maggie began, her voice trembling slightly. "His name is Arthur Hale. He was the one who hid all of this. The documents. The stone. Everything." Clara's pulse quickened. "Arthur Hale? What does he have to do with all of this?" Maggie took a deep breath, as if bracing herself to reveal something that had been buried for years. Arthur Hale was one of the wealthiest men in this town decades ago. He had secrets that no one knew about. He was involved in something dangerous. And when he died, everything he'd hidden was meant to be lost. But it wasn't. It was kept secret. "I've been looking for answers for years, Clara, and I think you've just uncovered something that was never meant to be found." Clara's mind raced. She felt a deep sense of unease, but also a spark of realization. This wasn't just about Edward. This wasn't just about the town's cruelty or the way she had been treated. There was something far more complex at play, a hidden history that went back much further than she had ever imagined. "What do you mean, dangerous?" Claire asked, her voice barely a whisper. Maggie hesitated. Arthur Hale was involved in a secret network, a group of people who used their wealth and power to manipulate the town's decisions. They created false identities, rigged elections, and controlled businesses. The stone you found, it's part of something much bigger. Something that could expose everything. Clara glanced down at the stone, now lying uncovered on the table. Its presence felt heavier now, as if the secrets it held were pressing down on her, urging her to uncover more. She felt a rush of adrenaline, but also a deep sense of fear. What had she stumbled into? Maggie's gaze softened as she looked at Clara. "You have the power to change everything, Clara. But you need to be careful. The people who were part of this, Arthur's network, they don't let go easily. They'll do anything to keep their secrets buried." Clara swallowed hard, the weight of Maggie's words sinking in. She had always thought her life was simple, that she was just another face in the crowd. But now, with the stone in her hand, she realized that she was standing at the center of something much bigger, something that could shatter the quiet facade of the town she had known for so long. "Are you ready to find out the truth?" Maggie asked, her eyes searching Clara's face. Clara took a deep breath. She didn't know if she was ready, but there was no turning back now. The clues were falling into place, and she couldn't ignore them. The world was changing around her, and for the first time, she felt like she had the power to change it too. "I'm ready," Clara said, her voice steady. "Let's find out what's really been hidden." And with that, she knew she was no longer just a bystander in her own life. The pieces were falling into place, and Clara was determined to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. The morning was cold, the skies overcast, and the wind cut through the town like a whisper, carrying secrets on its breath. Clara walked down the familiar streets, but everything felt different now. She could feel it deep within her, the pull of the unknown, the weight of the secret that had been hiding in plain sight for so long. She had the stone, and Maggie's words still echoed in her mind. "You have the power to change everything." But as she walked, there was a growing sense of unease. Edward had been watching her. She knew it. Every time she passed his shop, his eyes followed her, sharp and calculating. He had to know that she had found something. What had he done to protect his secret? And why was he so afraid of what she might uncover? Clara turned a corner, her breath visible in the chilly air, when she saw him. Edward stood just ahead, leaning against the doorway of his shop, watching her approach with a smile that was too wide, too cold. He knew everything. "Clara," Edward said, his voice smooth and mocking as she drew closer. "It's so nice to see you again. I've been wondering when you'd come around." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She knew he was up to something, but what? The stone was burning a hole in her pocket, a constant reminder that the truth was just out of reach. She didn't have time for games anymore. "I don't know what you're talking about," Clara said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. Her voice trembled slightly, but she steadied herself. "I haven't come here to speak to you." Edward chuckled darkly. "No? Then why don't you come a little closer? I think you and I have a lot to talk about. I think it's time you learned a few things, Clara." Clara's instincts screamed at her to walk away, to leave before it was too late, but she was no longer the silent woman she had been. Something had shifted inside her, something she couldn't ignore. Jasper had shown her that she was stronger than she thought. She wasn't going to let Edward intimidate her, not now, not when she was so close to the truth. "What do you want?" Clara asked, her voice firmer now, though the weight of the moment still made her pulse quicken. Edward's smile widened, and he straightened up, his posture shifting from casual to predatory. He took a step toward her, his eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "Oh, Clara," he said softly, his voice low and menacing. "You think you've figured it out, don't you? But you don't understand yet. You don't understand the danger you've put yourself in." Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she held her ground. "What danger?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What have you been hiding?" Edward paused, his expression momentarily faltering before he regained control. His gaze flickered to her pocket, where the stone was buried, and Clara felt a cold shiver crawl up her spine. He knew. Somehow, he knew she had it. "You really don't know, do you?" he asked, almost with pity in his voice. "The stone you found, it's not just a trinket. It's not just some artifact from a forgotten time. It's a key, Claire. A key to everything." Clara's mind raced. "The key? But to what?" Edward continued, his words slow and deliberate. "Arthur Hale wasn't just some rich man. He was part of something much bigger. A network, a group of powerful people who controlled everything. That stone, it's what connects all of us. What connects you. And now that you've found it, there's no going back." Clara swallowed, her mind whirling with questions. She had no idea what he was talking about, but one thing was clear: Edward was scared. He was trying to intimidate her, to make her doubt herself, but it wasn't working. If anything, it was only fueling her desire to learn more. "Why would you want to keep all of this hidden?" Claire asked, her voice steadier now. "What are you afraid of?" Edward's eyes darkened. "I'm not afraid, Clara, but I have to protect what's mine. And that includes you now. You don't know the power you're playing with. But you will soon enough. And when you do, you'll wish you'd stayed quiet." Clara's mind raced, her thoughts scrambling to process everything he had said. The stone was more than just a symbol. It was a key to something far greater, something that could unravel everything. But what was it? What had Edward been hiding, and what role did Clara play in all of this? Before Clara could speak again, Jasper squawked from her shoulder, his voice cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "You've heard enough, Clara. It's time to act." Clara's heart skipped a beat. The parrot's words were a signal, a call to action. She didn't know what was coming, but she knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let Edward control her. She wasn't going to let him keep her in the dark. She had the stone, and now she had a purpose. "I'm done hiding," Clara said, her voice steady and sure. "I'll find out the truth, Edward. And you can't stop me." Edward's face twisted into a snarl, his eyes flashing with fury. "You have no idea what you're getting into," he hissed, but Clara was already turning away, walking briskly toward the path that led out of town, away from Edward and his threats. As she walked, the wind seemed to shift, the air heavier, thicker. Clara didn't look back, but she could feel Edward's gaze burning into her back. He had underestimated her, and now it was too late to turn back. She had already stepped into a world of secrets, a world where power was no longer out of her reach. With Jasper at her side and the stone in her pocket, Clara knew one thing: she was going to expose everything, no matter the cost. The game had changed, and now it was her turn to make the rules. The next few days were a blur of tension, as if the entire town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, and with every glance she caught of Edward in the streets, that unease deepened. But this time, she wasn't the quiet woman anymore. She wasn't the one who shrank into the shadows. The discovery of the stone had changed her, awakened something deep inside that she couldn't ignore. Jasper, too, had become more focused. The parrot, once chatty and carefree, now observed everything with sharp, calculating eyes. He stayed close, perched on her shoulder like a sentinel, always aware of their surroundings. His silence was unnerving at times, but Clara knew he was guiding her, preparing her for what was to come. Clara had spent every free moment she had trying to decode the markings on the stone, but it was no use. The symbols were too complex, too foreign for her to understand. Yet, there was a feeling that tugged at her, an overwhelming certainty that the stone was the key to everything. Arthur Hale had hidden it for a reason. For what? And how did Edward fit into all of this? She had tried to reach Maggie for more answers, but the librarian had been mysteriously absent for days, leaving Clara to wonder if she had gotten too close to the truth. Was Maggie involved in this too? Or had she been trying to protect Clara from something darker? One afternoon, Clara decided to take matters into her own hands. She had no choice but to confront Edward, to force him into revealing what he knew. She had to know what the stone meant, what power it held, and why he was so desperate to keep her away from it. She walked toward his shop, the familiar sound of the bell ringing as she stepped inside. The shop was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and leather. Edward was behind the counter, his eyes scanning a ledger, but when he saw her, he straightened up, the cold smile returning to his lips. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth, almost too calm. "What brings you here today?" Clara didn't hesitate. She walked up to the counter, her hands clutching the stone in her pocket. She wasn't going to let him play his games anymore. She had to know the truth. "I know what you've been hiding, Edward," she said, her voice steady. "I know about Arthur Hale and the network. I know the stone is the key to everything. And I want answers." Edward's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe, or fear, but it was gone in an instant. He leaned forward, his smile widening, though there was a coldness in his gaze. "You're treading dangerous ground, Clara," he said, his voice low and warning. "You have no idea what you're really dealing with. The stone is more than just a key, it's a weapon, a tool. And once you've unlocked it, there's no turning back." Clara felt a shiver crawl up her spine, but she didn't back down. "Tell me what it unlocks, Edward. What are you protecting? What are you so afraid of?" For a moment, Edward said nothing, his face expressionless. Then, with a sigh, he pushed the ledger aside and leaned back in his chair, as if making a decision. His eyes never left Clara's, as if he were trying to gauge whether she would understand. "It's not just about power, Clara," he said slowly. "It's about control. Arthur Hale and his group, they were part of something much bigger. They created an empire built on secrets, lies, and manipulation. And that stone, it holds the key to their legacy. If you unlock it, you're unlocking everything they've ever done. And once that door is open, there's no going back." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "What exactly do you mean by everything?" Edward leaned forward, his voice lowering to a near whisper. "Arthur Hale and his group didn't just control businesses and politics. They controlled people. They manipulated their very minds, Clara. They could make people do things without them even realizing it. The stone, it's a device. A way to track and control everything they built. If you unlock it, you'll have access to all of it. Every secret, every lie, every manipulation." Clara stood frozen, her mind reeling. She had known the stone was important, but this? This was something far darker than she had imagined. The idea that a group of people could control entire lives, entire communities without anyone even knowing, it made her sick to her stomach. But why didn't you want anyone to find it? If it was just about power, why not just use it? Clara asked, her voice trembling slightly with a mix of fear and anger. Edward's smile faltered, and for the briefest moment, Clara saw something in his eyes, a flicker of regret, or maybe guilt. Because once you have the power to control people like that, you become something else. You lose yourself. And I wasn't ready to lose myself. But you, Clara, you're different. You've always been different. And I think you might be the one who can take it all down. Clara's mind raced. The stone, this weapon of control, could be the very thing that would destroy everything Edward and his network had built. But at what cost? Would using it make her the same as them? Would she lose herself too? Jasper, perched on her shoulder, let out a sharp squawk, drawing Clara's attention. "Don't let them win, Clara. You have the power now. You've already made your choice." Clara felt a sense of clarity wash over her. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. The truth was in her hands, and she had the power to decide how it would end. "I'm not like you, Edward," Clara said, her voice steady and strong. "I'm not going to use this power to control anyone. I'm going to destroy it. I'm going to take down everything you've built." Edward's expression twisted into something dark and dangerous. "You think you can just walk away from this, Clara? You think you can just change everything? You have no idea what you're up against." Clara stood her ground. "I do now." And with that, she turned and walked out of the shop, the weight of the stone in her pocket grounding her. She wasn't just a quiet woman anymore. She wasn't just a bystander in her own life. She was the one who would change everything. And the battle was just beginning. The town felt different now. The air was thicker, charged with an energy Clara couldn't quite put into words. It was as if everything had shifted, as if the moment she had walked out of Edward's shop, she had crossed an invisible line. the weight of the stone in her pocket pressed against her side, a constant reminder of the power she now held, the secrets she had uncovered. And yet, despite the fear and uncertainty swirling inside her, there was something else, something that felt like purpose. She had made a choice. She was going to expose everything. She wasn't going to let Edward's network control the town any longer. They had hidden their secrets for too long, buried them beneath layers of lies and manipulation. But now Clara had the key. The stone, the documents, and the truth, they were all in her hands. And with Jasper by her side, she knew she couldn't turn back. But as she walked down the familiar streets, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone was following her. Every glance she caught of the townspeople, every whisper she overheard, made her skin prickle. The world around her seemed to close in, like the walls were slowly creeping closer. She knew the danger wasn't just from Edward, it was from the network he was part of, the people who would do anything to protect their secrets. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden commotion ahead. She turned the corner just in time to see a small crowd gathered outside the bakery. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw Maggie standing in the middle of the crowd, her face pale, her expression one of disbelief. "Maggie!" Clara called out, rushing toward her. "What's going on?" Maggie turned, her eyes wide with panic. "Clara, you need to get out of here. They know. They know what you've found." Clara's breath caught in her throat. "Who knows?" "The people in power," Maggie whispered, her voice trembling. "They've been watching you. They know you have the stone. And they're not going to let you take it down." Before Clara could respond, a car screeched to a halt in front of the bakery. The door swung open, and out stepped a man Clara didn't recognize. He was tall, with sharp features and a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He wore a suit that looked too expensive for the small town, and his presence felt like a weight pressing down on the air. Maggie stepped back, her eyes filled with fear. "That's Thomas. He's one of them. One of the people who helped Arthur Hale build this empire." Clara felt a surge of anger. She wasn't going to let them intimidate her anymore. Not now, not after everything she had learned. Thomas walked toward the crowd, his eyes scanning the people around him. When his gaze landed on Clara, his lips curled into a slight smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "There she is," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "The quiet woman with the parrot. The one who thinks she can undo everything Arthur Hale built." Clara's heart raced, but she didn't back down. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady. Thomas's smile widened as he took a step closer. "What I want," he said slowly, "is for you to hand over the stone. We've been keeping an eye on you, Clara, and we know you have it. So, why don't you make this easy on yourself? Hand it over, and we can forget all of this ever happened." Clara's hands clenched into fists. She wasn't going to give up the stone. She wasn't going to let them win. "I'm not giving you anything," she said, her voice full of defiance. "You've been hiding the truth for far too long. It's time for it to come out." Thomas's smile faltered, and for a brief moment, Clara saw a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the cold, calculating look that had become all too familiar. "You really think you can just walk away from this, don't you?" Thomas asked, his voice low and threatening. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. The people we represent don't take kindly to people like you trying to destroy everything they've built." Clara's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. "I'm not afraid of you, and I'm not going to stop until the truth is exposed." Thomas took a step back, his expression shifting to one of amusement. "You're brave, I'll give you that. But bravery won't save you. You've already made your choice, Clara, and now you'll have to live with the consequences." With that, he turned and walked back to the car, motioning for his associates to follow. The crowd began to disperse, but Clara didn't move. She stood frozen, her heart still racing, as the weight of what had just happened settled in. They knew. They knew everything. Maggie stepped up beside her, her face pale. "Clara, they're not going to stop. They'll come for you. You have to leave town. You have to disappear." Clara shook her head. "I'm not running. Not anymore. I have the truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows it." She turned, her gaze focused on the path ahead. The battle was just beginning, and Clara knew that no matter what happened, she couldn't stop now. The truth would be exposed, and nothing, no one, could stand in her way. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much bigger fight. The people behind Edward and Thomas weren't going to let her take them down without a fight. But Clara was no longer afraid. She had the stone, the truth, and the strength to see it through. The only question left was, Who would win in the end? The days blurred into nights as Clara walked through the familiar streets, the stone burning a hole in her pocket like a weight she could no longer ignore. The town had changed since her confrontation with Edward and Thomas. There was a tension in the air, thick and palpable. People whispered as she passed by, some casting nervous glances her way, others hurriedly turning away, as if they were afraid that just being near her would bring trouble. Clara knew it was only a matter of time before they came for her. She had seen the power in their eyes, the fear in Thomas's gaze when she had refused to back down. They were afraid of the truth. And she had it. The stone was the key to everything they had built and hidden for so long. She knew she couldn't do it alone. There were too many of them, too many shadows lurking in the background, pulling the strings. But Clara wasn't the quiet woman anymore. She had a purpose now. And with Jasper at her side, she wasn't going to back down. Maggie had been right. They were coming for her, but Clara wasn't going to wait for them to make the first move. It was time to take action. That night, she sat at the small table in her apartment, the stone in front of her, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. She ran her fingers over the strange markings on the surface again, trying to make sense of them, but the symbols were still as elusive as ever. But Clara could feel it. The stone was calling to her. It wasn't just a key, it was a beacon, a signal that would lead her to the truth. Jasper squawked, breaking the silence. "It's time, Clara. You can't keep running from this." Clara nodded, her mind made up. "I know, but I need help. I need someone who knows what this means." She grabbed the phone and dialed Maggie's number, her heart pounding in her chest. The librarian had been avoiding her calls for days, and Clara had begun to wonder if she was in danger. But she had to take the risk. Maggie was the only person who might know how to unlock the stone's secret. The phone rang twice before Maggie's voice answered, her tone strained. "Clara, where are you? You need to leave. They're looking for you." Clara's pulse quickened. "I'm not leaving, Maggie. I need your help. I have the stone. I don't know what it unlocks, but I can feel its power. Please, you have to help me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Maggie's voice softened. "You've uncovered something far bigger than I ever realized. I didn't want you involved in this, Clara. But now you have no choice. Meet me at the old library tomorrow night. I'll explain everything." Clara felt a surge of hope, mixed with anxiety. She knew she was getting closer to the truth. The stone, the documents, and Edward's cryptic warnings, all of it was leading her down a path she couldn't turn back from. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready. The next night, Clara walked to the old library, the stone heavy in her pocket. It was the darkest part of town, the streets almost empty, save for the occasional figure darting into the shadows. The library had always been a place of mystery, its windows dark and its doors creaking on their hinges. It had been abandoned for years, its purpose long forgotten by most of the town's residents. But Clara knew it was where the answers were hidden. As she reached the front steps, she saw Maggie waiting at the door, her face pale and drawn. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days, the weight of the secrets they both carried bearing down on her. When she saw Clara, her eyes softened, and she motioned for her to come inside. The library was dark and musty, the air thick with the smell of old paper and dust. Maggie led Clara to a small, hidden room at the back of the building, where shelves of ancient books lined the walls. A single lamp flickered on a table in the center of the room, casting long shadows across the walls. "Maggie," Clara said, her voice urgent, "what is all of this? Why is this stone so important?" Maggie took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving the stone Clara held in her hand. Arthur Hale wasn't just a wealthy man with a secret. He was part of something far darker, Clara. This stone is a key to a network of power and manipulation that goes back generations. It was meant to control people's minds, to bend them to the will of those in charge. And now it's in your hands. Clara's heart raced. "What do you mean? How does it work?" Maggie's eyes flickered with fear. The stone doesn't just hold information. It holds influence. Whoever controls it can manipulate the minds of those around them. They can control thoughts, actions, even entire communities. Arthur Hale's group used it to build their empire, to keep everyone under their thumb. But you, Clara, you're different. You've unlocked something that no one else could. You have the power to destroy it, to expose them all. Clara's hands trembled as she stared down at the stone. The weight of its power was overwhelming, but the thought of what it could do, what it had done, made her sick. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted this power. But now, it was her responsibility. "So what do I do now?" Clara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You have to take it to the heart of their network, Maggie said. There's a place, hidden beneath the town, where they conduct their most secretive operations. You have to destroy the stone there, in the heart of their power. Only then can you break their control. Clara nodded, her mind made up. She had come this far. She couldn't stop now. She had to finish what she had started. Maggie handed her a small map, showing the hidden location beneath the town. Be careful, Clara. They'll be watching. And they won't let you get away with this. Clara took the map, her hands steady now. I won't back down. I can't. With that, Clara turned toward the door, her heart racing with determination. The truth was within reach. And now, she was ready to take it all down. The game was over. It was time for the world to see the truth. The power they had hidden for so long would finally be exposed. And Clara, no longer the quiet woman with the parrot, was the one who would bring it to light. The night was colder than Clara expected as she made her way to the hidden location beneath the town. The streets seemed deserted, and the shadows stretched long across the pavement, as though the entire world was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The stone in her pocket weighed heavily, but it was no longer just a burden. It was a weapon, one that could shatter everything they had built. She wasn't just carrying a secret anymore. She was carrying the truth, the key to everything. Jasper was unusually quiet on her shoulder, his feathers ruffled, but his eyes alert, scanning their surroundings. He hadn't spoken much in the past few hours, but Clara knew he was there with her, steady as ever. His presence gave her a sense of calm in the chaos of her thoughts. This was the endgame, and she had no illusions about what might happen when she stepped into the heart of their power. Maggie's instructions had been clear. The entrance to the underground network was hidden beneath an old, disused warehouse at the edge of town. Clara had walked past it countless times, never giving it a second thought. Now, every creak of the warehouse door felt like a drumbeat of destiny, each step taking her closer to a confrontation she couldn't avoid. When she reached the building, she stopped for a moment, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She looked around one last time, as if to commit the moment to memory. This was it. The town, the secrets, the power that had been kept in the shadows for so long, it was all about to come crashing down. Clara pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, echoing through the empty space. Inside, the warehouse was dark and cold, the only light coming from a faint glow at the far end of the room. The floor was covered in dust and grime, untouched for years. But Clara didn't hesitate. She moved forward, determined to reach the heart of it all. At the back of the warehouse, a large metal door stood, slightly ajar, as though waiting for her. The air felt heavier as she approached it, the anticipation thick in her chest. Her pulse raced. She reached for the stone in her pocket, feeling its weight once more. This was the final step. She pushed the door open, and what she saw took her breath away. The room was unlike anything Clara had expected. It was massive, an underground facility filled with technology she couldn't even begin to understand. The walls were lined with monitors, and rows of machines hummed with a low, mechanical drone. In the center of the room was a large, circular table, its surface covered with papers, maps, and strange devices. It was here, at the heart of this secretive network, that the true power had resided all along. And standing in the center of it all was Edward. His back was turned as he studied one of the screens, but as Clara stepped into the room, he turned, his face expressionless. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice cold. "You've walked right into the lion's den, Clara. Do you really think you can destroy everything I've worked for?" Clara stood still, her heart pounding in her chest. But this time, she didn't feel fear. She felt resolved. She had the truth now. She had the power to change everything. "You don't control me anymore, Edward," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "And you won't control this town." Edward's lips curled into a mocking smile. "You don't understand, do you? You can't stop it. You can't destroy what's already been built. It's too late for that." Clara's fingers tightened around the stone. She could feel its energy now, as if it was alive with the power it contained. She wasn't going to let him win. She had come too far, fought too hard, to turn back now. "Maybe you're right," Clara said, her voice quiet, but the strength in it was undeniable. "But it's not about stopping it. It's about making sure it ends." She reached into her pocket, pulling out the stone, her fingers brushing against its cool surface. As soon as she held it in her hand, the room seemed to hum with energy. The lights flickered, the machines around her blinking to life as if the stone had activated something deep within the facility. Edward's eyes widened in shock, his face betraying the fear that had been buried beneath his calm exterior. "No, You can't. But Clara didn't listen. She stepped forward, her heart in her throat as she approached the central control panel. There, in the heart of it all, was the key to everything. The stone that had been hidden for so long, the device that had been used to manipulate and control. It had to end. She placed the stone on the table, and as her fingers brushed against it, the room erupted in a surge of energy. The monitors around her flickered wildly, and the machines hummed louder, their power rising to a crescendo. The entire building seemed to shake as if the very foundation of the town was shifting beneath her feet. Clara's heart raced. This was the moment. The stone began to glow, its markings lighting up with a brilliant, otherworldly light. The power that had been contained within it surged outward, and Clara could feel the weight of it, the gravity of what she was doing. She was destroying everything they had built. She was taking back control. Edward lunged toward her, his hands outstretched, but it was too late. The energy in the room reached its peak, and with a deafening crash, the stone shattered. The lights went out, and the room fell silent. Clara stood there, breathless, her heart still pounding in her chest. She had done it. The stone was gone. The network was broken. The power that had held the town in its grip was shattered. And as the darkness enveloped the room, Clara knew one thing for sure. The truth had been exposed, and nothing would ever be the same again. It was over. A year had passed since that night. The night Clara had shattered the stone and broken the grip of those who had controlled the town for so long. The once oppressive weight that had hovered over the streets of the small town was gone. The air felt lighter now, as if the very essence of the place had been freed. The town had changed, and so had Clara. She sat in a small office, her fingers moving across the keyboard with ease, her focus sharp. The walls around her were filled with framed photographs of animals, most of them from rescue missions she had organized. The desk was cluttered with papers, blueprints, and plans for new shelters. It was clear that Clara had found a new purpose, one that was just as powerful and meaningful as the journey that had led her here. The town had come together, its people more aware now of what had happened, of the manipulation and the control they had been under. The people who had once been part of the network, who had blindly followed Edward and the others, were now helping to rebuild. It wasn't easy. The road to recovery was long and painful, but Clara had seen the change in their eyes. They were no longer afraid. They had learned the truth, and now they were determined to rebuild, stronger and more united than ever. Jasper, perched on her desk, let out a soft squawk, breaking Clara's concentration. She looked up and smiled at the parrot, his once muted feathers now vibrant with color. He had always been her constant companion, and through it all, he had never wavered. She knew deep down that he had been more than just a pet. He had been her guide, her voice of reason in the storm. "I know, Jasper," Clara said with a smile, tapping the pile of papers on her desk. "There's still so much to do, but we're getting there." She stood up and walked over to the window, gazing out at the town below. The streets were alive with people, families walking hand in hand, children playing, and neighbors chatting over coffee. The shadows that had once lingered in every corner seemed to have disappeared, replaced by an air of hope and possibility. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her back to the present. She glanced at the screen and saw Maggie's name. It had been a while since they last spoke. Clara had always appreciated Maggie's wisdom, and in many ways, Maggie had been the one to guide her through the darkest moments. Clara picked up the phone and answered, her voice warm. "Maggie, how are you?" "I'm good, Clara." Maggie's voice came through, soft but filled with a quiet strength. "I just wanted to check in. I know things have been crazy, but I think it's time we talked about what's next." Clara paused for a moment, letting Maggie's words sink in. What's next? She had spent so much time focused on the fight, on the moment when everything would be exposed, that she hadn't truly stopped to think about the future. "What do you mean?" Claire asked, her voice filled with curiosity. "I think it's time to take your work beyond this town," Maggie said. "You've done so much already, but there's a bigger world out there. There are other towns, other places that could benefit from what you've learned, from the way you've brought people together. You have the ability to make a real change, Clara. It's not just about this town anymore. It's about spreading that hope." Clara's heart swelled as she listened to Maggie's words. She had spent so long focused on the fight, on the destruction of the old ways, that she hadn't fully realized the potential she had to build something new, something lasting. There were so many people who needed help, so many places where the light of truth and healing hadn't yet reached. "I never thought of it that way," Clara said softly, her mind already racing with possibilities. "But you're right. This town, this experience has taught me that I can do more. I want to help more people." I want to make sure no one else has to live in the shadows like I did." "You've got it, Clara," Maggie said, a hint of pride in her voice. "The world needs your light, and I think it's time you shared it with others." Clara smiled as she looked out the window, the weight of the past year lifting from her shoulders. She had faced darkness, fear, and manipulation, but she had emerged from it stronger, more certain of who she was and what she could do. The town had healed, and now it was time for Clara to help heal others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the streets, Clara felt a quiet sense of peace. She had fought the battle, she had exposed the truth, and she had helped rebuild a community that was stronger than ever. But now, as she stepped into the next chapter of her journey, she knew that the real work was just beginning. And with Jasper by her side, the future seemed limitless. In the distance, a group of children ran down the street, laughing and playing, a symbol of the hope that had been restored. Clara watched them for a moment, and then, with a deep breath, she turned back to her desk. There was work to be done, lives to be changed, and a world to help. Her story was far from over. It was only just beginning. And as she picked up her pen, ready to write the next chapter, she knew one thing for sure. The truth was powerful, but hope was even stronger. And it was time for her to spread that hope wherever it was needed. If Clara's journey inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of courage, transformation, and the power of truth. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that change starts with one person, and together, we can create a better future. And remember, just like Clara, you have the strength to make a difference. So, what's your next step? Let us know in the comments below. Stay tuned for more, and thanks for watching.